Chased at 4 a.m.? A few years back, summer 2012, I was working at a local dive bar and usually got off my shift at around 3:30 a.m. if things went smoothly. This night had been a particularly busy one since we had outdoor live music and cheap drinks. I would usually walk to my friend's place after my shift, which was about 10 minutes away on a lit main road. But this night I was tired and wanted to sleep in my own bed, so I decided to walk home to my parents' house on the less busy side of town, probably a 20 to 25 minute walk. My entire life, my mom had forbidden me to walk alone after dark, and my entire life I ignored her, thinking she was just paranoid. So during the night at some point, a bottle of liquor was stolen from behind the bar by some sneaky people, one of whom turned out to be a guy I had known as an acquaintance since we were children, and who was always in and out of jail for various crimes, including assault and domestic violence. We caught him because he drank it and came back with a blue tongue, claiming it wasn't him, and we were nice enough to just let him leave without charging him. He was barred from ever returning, but that was it. Fast forward to me walking home. I was about to cross this long bridge in town, which means I am still only about 5 minutes away from the bar, and I crossed past with a sketchy guy with his hood up over most of his face. I did not recognize him at the time and just kept walking, but I glanced behind me a couple times to be sure he kept moving. I crossed this long-ass bridge and make it over a huge steep hill that divides downtown from uptown, and as I am walking down the other side, I notice a police car driving towards me on my side of the road. They stopped next to me and the passenger side cop started rolling down his window, but he interrupted himself and said, "Oh, never mind, wrong person, sorry," and they drove away. That was the weirdest interaction I ever had with a police, so as I walked away, I turned to look behind me and noticed there were stopped only a few yards behind where I had been, and who was leaning and talking to them but the guy I had passed going the opposite direction as me at least 10 minutes ago. This creeped me the hell out, so I began to walk as fast as I could, and when I turned around again, the cop was nowhere in sight and this guy was full tilt sprinting down the sidewalk in my direction. Luckily, the cop delay had put a bit of distance between us, and I was at the top of my parents' street when I noticed him. I did not hesitate. I didn't wait to be sure he was really coming for me. I just fucked off as fast as my stubby legs and Walmart flip-flops could carry me, ran about 3 blocks and got to the door. I did the whole movie fumble and dropped the key thing and panicked, but when I turned back to look, I didn't see him anywhere, and I got into the house safely. I chugged about a gallon of water, puked in the sink, went to bed and cried myself to sleep. It was only the next day when I told my parents and sister that I suddenly realized as clear as day that I had recognized him, and it was the guy with the blue tongue. So I don't know if it was after me out of spite for barring him, or if he knew I had a lot of tips on me and wanted to rob me, or worse. Side story, when we were maybe 7 or 8, the same guy held me down in a park and held a shard of broken glass against my throat. He said something like, "Stop being such a slut or I'll kill you." And it took me years to realize he was obviously recreating scenes he had witnessed in his home life. Makes me sad for the kid he used to be, but also I hope I never run into this guy again. Missed being mugged by mere seconds. This happened about 10 years ago while I was in college. I lived in a sorority house, and I would often hang out with the fraternity across the streets. One night, a bunch of us had been out drinking a lot, and a bit of drama came about. It was around 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. when we drove home and parked right outside my sorority house. We were all a little upset about the drama I mentioned, and very, very drunk, which only made us more upset. Jesse and the 2 other boys were talking about the events of the evening. I had a strong and sudden urge to go. At the time, I decided that I was sick of the drama and sick of talking about it. I just wanted to go to bed. I said goodnight, left the car, and went inside. I got to my room and changed into pajamas when I got a call from Anthony, a guy from the frat who hadn't been in the car. "Did Jesse and them just get mugged?" he asked. "What?" Jesse just called from the frat's phone and said he and the other guys were just mugged. You're with them. Is this a joke? I've been gone for less than 5 minutes. I don't think it was possible, but Anthony was concerned. I walked across the street to the frat house to find out what in the world had just happened. Turns out just a few seconds after I got inside my house, a couple drove up to my friend's car and pulled a gun on them, demanding their money and phones. The boys complied and the couple drove off. Luckily, no one was hurt, just scared shitless. I miss being mugged by mere seconds. I often think back to the strong urge I had to leave the car. Could have been a coincidence or luck, but I think it was a strange feeling, a gut feeling, that something bad was about to happen. "4 a.m. car cleaning." I felt I had to share this encounter, because honestly, I never thought I'd experience something like this myself. Sure, I've read all this no-sleep posts and freaked myself out, but this was different. This wasn't a scary monster or even ghosts. This was a close call, or so I believe. Some quick background leading up to the night in question. I am graduating from university tomorrow, so I was determined to get an early night. I had gone round to my friends for a wee spliff, but don't get me wrong, I'm not a pothead. It was more of a celebration anyways. I remembered I had to take Mom to the hospital. Nothing serious, but she had to be taken and picked up. Then I remember we'd roll the joints in the car. Disaster. She'd smell and see it everywhere. So I made a mental note to stop and vacuum the car. We have a 24-hour petrol station really close to us, but it's sort of on its own. As in, there are no houses or buildings around. I pull in and look over to the stop. They use a hatch after 12 and don't allow you inside, but I didn't need anything. It had just ticked over 4 a.m. and I had to be up at 10 a.m, so I wanted to just get this done and get out of here. The vacuum machine was behind the coal shed, but it was well lit. I cranked on some music on my phone and got to work. £1 for 4 minutes of vacuuming. Not bad, I thought. No one else was in the parking lot except for one white fan, but the guy inside was yelling wildly into his phone. Not loudly, just making a lot of gestures. I felt for him. Probably some guy who had been driving all night, but hey, I cracked on with the work at hand. Then I looked over again and caught his eye. He looked away and I laughed. Love at first sight, I thought to myself. I was in an amazing mood. Then it started to get weird. The summer sun was already starting to rise, and the street lights went out, including those illuminating the petrol station. It wasn't that dark, but it was noticeably creepier, and I was keen to really get a move on. I stared over at the van and saw the man watching me again, still talking on his phone, but then something happened that I really freaked out at. I saw someone lean forward from the other seat and peek around the guy, then immediately slam themselves against back the seat. That's when I realized the guy on the phone was in the passenger seat and wasn't driving. I hadn't noticed it when I drove in, but I shrugged it off and set the vacuum cleaner back, ready to leave. I threw all my stuff back into my car and went to unlock the door when a voice said, "Excuse me." I swear, I nearly shat myself there and then. My heart was absolutely pounding, but I recognized the voice. The petrol station was a Spar, the same chain of stores I work in, and the guy who'd spoken was my old supervisor. He'd moved to the 24-hour store not too long ago. He began to shout at me for using the vacuum so late at night. The two guys in the van just sat and watched us, as if waiting for him to go away. Then he said something to me that made the whole situation real. "I'm going to have to ask you to come inside. We aren't allowed to let customers in past 11. Even in stores that open until 12, this is a big no-no, especially as I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong." I allowed him to lead the way, and the moment we were in the store, he put the shutter down. He told me he'd been watching the guys in the van, and they'd been sitting there for nearly 3 hours. Little did I know. My old supervisor saw someone get out of the back of the van, and as he described it, put a bit of masking tape across a few zeros in their number plate, effectively creating a new one. I began to panic. Looking outside, I noticed the van was gone. After checking the CCTV, it was shown that they sped away the minute I was taken into the store. We called the police, and they examined what little footage was there immediately. They took the tape and thanked us for bringing it to their attention. At one point on the CCTV, the guy who got out of the back of the van turned to get back in, and it looked like he had a knife in his hand. I realize I sound dramatic, but this story isn't exactly thrilling. But I cannot imagine what would have happened if my old supervisor hadn't been looking out for me. I'm never vacuuming at 4 a.m. anymore. That's for sure. Woke up to a man prowling my property at 4 a.m. Hi all, long-time reader, first-time poster. I never thought I had something hit so close to home. For some context, I live in a small Caribbean island in a middle-class neighborhood with my wife and 2-year-old daughter. My townhouse is located in a quiet cul-de-sac. On one side of the house is the main street and a shared driveway. On the other side is a very private courtyard, completely out of sight from the road, which is shared with 2 other townhouses that are very isolated. Beyond the courtyard is an overgrown bush and an abandoned house under construction with boarded up windows. This house almost sits on top the courtyard and just has a bad vibe all the time. All my windows face the courtyard, the bush, and the abandoned house. There were many nights I'd be playing PS4 and just catch a weird vibe that someone was watching me from the bush. I eventually got blackout curtains, but still felt eyes on my back, like whoever it was could see the illumination from the TV and know I was awake. Things got real about 3 weeks ago. My daughter was starting school in April, and my wife is a stay-at-home mom, so they are usually home during the daytime while I am at work. I work a 9 to 5. It was a Wednesday morning, and my wife asked if I could drop her and my daughter to a nearby mall to do some shopping on my way to work. I picked them up around 11 a.m., dropped them home, and quickly headed back to the office. I work in a small company, and the flexibility with time is great. At around 12:30 p.m., while my wife was in the kitchen, one of my neighbors started pounding on our door. My next-door neighbor across the courtyard had just come home, walked around by her very isolated back door, and found that someone had broken the glass door on their patio facing the bush. I rushed home to check the scene out, and we waited for the police. We had no idea who it was. All we knew is that the break-in occurred between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. while everyone's car were gone. My wife is usually home at this time, but this day she was out. What bothered me was that the houses are all built the same way, with the same doors. I was properly creeped out at this point, and asked my wife to not open the blinds and curtains so wide while she was home alone. A few weeks pass by, and everything seems normal again, or as normal as can be. The incident is still in all our minds, but we get on with life. Another week passes by, and it's a Tuesday night. I was awake, playing this game called Fortnite, until about 1:30 a.m. I decided it was getting late, and headed downstairs for a snack. Came back up and lay down reading the sub before I drifted off. I remember at around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like 3 bangs that made me pause. I told myself it was the wind, but when I looked outside, the night was deadly quiet. It wasn't windy at all. I remember checking every window and even turning off the fans in the house so I could hear it more clearly. The voice in my head kept saying that those bangs sounded human. It sounded like someone was doing something, but I couldn't see anything and drifted off to sleep again. At around 3:45 a.m., I was awoken by the neighbor's dogs across from my driveway on the main street barking. I usually would just go back to sleep, but my body shot up and I felt cold. I rushed to the window facing the driveway and saw a tall Rasta man pulling the door handles on all of the cars. I wanted to shout at him with my accent, "Yo, what the fuck you doing? Get the fuck out of here!" But again I paused. As he walked away down the street, I realized he was holding a machete. That night I couldn't get back to sleep. I called the police to inform them of what I saw, and they never ever came. The next morning, Wednesday, I messaged all my neighbors to let them know what I saw the night before. Everyone was on edge that morning, wondering what the fuck was going on. My neighbor with the dogs had surveillance cameras facing my driveway and caught the prowler as he moved around the houses, checking windows, doors, and cars, confirming what I had seen. He had disappeared into the courtyard out of sight for a while that night. I left for work at 9 a.m. The last thing I told my wife was to close the blinds a bit more. I had a weird vibe coming from the bush. At around 10:30 a.m., I received a call from my wife. I stupidly canceled it and tried video calling her back to chat with my daughter. She ended it immediately, and a call came through again. This time I answered, and it's like everything in my world stopped. She was whispering and in tears. She sounded very scared. All I heard was, "There is a man beating the door down right now in the courtyard." My fucking phone battery died at this point. I was in a state of panic. I rushed to my car and flew home in under 10 minutes. I pulled into the courtyard area so damn hard and so damn fast, and ran into the middle, cursing that this shit can't be happening again. Fortunately, the man had not broken down my door, but my neighbor's door again. It was smashed. I wasn't even expecting what happened next. I thought the man was in and out. The same Rasta man I saw at 4 a.m. came flying out the door with a large knife, hopped over a fence, and ran through the bushes collecting a backpack he had stashed away. After the police arrived and neighbors up the hill came out, we all started talking, and a picture of what happened that morning became clear. My neighbor, who lives up the hill from us, saw a man enter my neighbor's yard and walk to the back door after she left for work. He then watched as the man hammered and chiseled out a door with a deadbolt. He called the police with the hopes they'd come and catch him. That didn't happen. The man chiseled at the door for 15 minutes. This time, my wife was in the kitchen and hearing hammering but couldn't see him as he was in a blind spot from her home. She went to check the living room by the courtyard and heard her back door knob start violently shaking. She ran back to the kitchen and the noise had stopped. When she looked through the courtyard window, a man was staring right back at her. He then proceeded to my neighbor's other glass door, and in one hit, he was inside. My wife ran upstairs with my daughter and locked herself in the bedroom and called me. The police took over 30 minutes to show up that morning, and my wife refuses to go back to that house. As most days, she's the only one in the cul-de-sac when everyone else is out. We were renting the place, so she packed all our belongings, and we are currently in temporary accommodation looking for another home that isn't so isolated. Gonna get a dog as well when we move to stay in the house with her. She says the man is still out there and she feels like he will come back for her one morning if we don't move. Los Angeles at 4 a.m. Hi guys, I want to tell y'all about a lonely night in the city and warn there's a lot of stupid decisions in here. Moving on. I just moved from a nice part of LA to a seedy neighborhood near downtown by myself. At the time I was seeing my now ex and would get drunk on a daily basis to forget he was around. On one of these drunken nights, I decided to walk from my apartment to downtown, about a 20-minute walk or so. Mind you, the sailor Jerry in my system didn't know what a good decision making or fear was, and to my luck, how to hold on your keys. That being said, I ended up losing my apartment, car, and front gate keys during my downtown stumble and called my ex to drive me home. He was able to get in touch with my landlord, since I couldn't even hold long or even recognize numbers on my phone at this time, and get me safely back to my room. Being the guy he was, I was left alone in my room to make another dumb decision. Go find my keys. By now, the night was almost over at about 4 a.m. By some miracle, I was able to make the walk back to downtown without getting assaulted, and in my drunken state was a minute closer to finding my long-lost keys. Big mistake. While searching the sidewalks for any Hyundai sedan fobs, I noticed a black Mercedes slowing down around me. The man inside was a bald dude who looked Middle Eastern or European with a heavy accent, and from his suit, I could tell meant business. This is the kind of guy that didn't take no for an answer. He asked if I needed a ride, and if I wanted to go have fun. I'm buzzing it now, dressed in pajamas and cold with the face of a scared 14-year-old Mexican girl. I'm 21 years old now, but have a baby face. He couldn't possibly think I was of age or even interested in partying up at 4 a.m. in the morning. I said no and kept walking, so he drove away. About a minute later, I see him circle the block and come back again, this time with a phone in his hand and talking in a foreign accent while eyeing me and continuing to ask me to get inside. He leaves and circles around a few more times. At this point, I am about to shit myself and book it to another block through an alleyway, hoping he won't see me. Sobered up from fear, I dial 911 and tell them the whole entire situation. Unfortunately, twice, the 911 operators ignore me and say to call my landlord for my apartment keys, ignoring the fact that I'm being followed. Third time's the charm, and an operator directs me to a hotel, as downtown this late has nothing open and no safe havens except hotels. He says there will be cops there waiting for me to help. I see the black Mercedes cruise by, with windows down once again from the alley, and when it's gone, book it to the hotel. There I met up with two cops, who are more upset at the fact that I'm out late than about a rich foreign guy following me in his car. Still, they give me a ride home and help me get into my place. After learning that I'm an EMT who frequents the station and transports some of their detainees. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if that operator didn't believe me, or if those cops couldn't help me get home, or why Mercedes man was talking on the phone as if he was talking about a watch he wanted to buy to a friend. I don't drink anymore and moved out of that apartment and haven't talked to my ex in a long time. This night was more than a drunk and dumb one. It was one of the worst periods of my life. It reminds me all the time how lucky I am to be doing better now. I never did find my keys either. Maybe a downtown menace has them. Why else would you be walking around at 4 a.m.? In my university years, I was what might some call frugal, to the point where I would walk everywhere instead of getting a taxi, no matter the time or the distance. Every Saturday, I would leave my favorite club at around 3:30 and make the 40-minute walk home. Sometimes I would stop at the halfway point at my friend's for after drinks, but not this night. It had been a pretty shitty night. Some psycho girl saying I was trying to steal her man, or some poppycock like that. So I was in a mood and walking home at 3:30 in the morning along the main road in the town. Most of the time when I do this, it was still pretty regular traffic, and as a university town, many people will be doing the same walk as me. That night was different though. It was still night and there was little to no humans anywhere, except one guy walking ahead of me. No alarm bells rang, not even when he turned down into an alley that I knew was a dead end, because guys like to piss down alleys, and as I walked past, I could see he had his dick out against the wall like any guy would when he was peeing. This, however, was when I realized he wasn't peeing, when I noticed his hand was moving up and down with vigor. I sped up and walked right past him. I was nearing my street and I wasn't concerned till I heard him catching up behind me, hands still clutching his dick. He started to walk in time with me and began to engage in conversation while still holding his penis. "Hey, it's so pretty late out. Wanna come back to mine?" "No thanks." "We could have sex, I pay you. I mean, why else are you walking around at 4 a.m.? At this point I turned to him in anger from earlier, boiling over. I said no, I'm walking home. Now get your gross shriveled raisin dick out of my face, you grotesque pervert. I was only asking, no need to be rude. I continued walking, and weirdly, he kept walking with me. It was awkward to say the least, and as I turned up my road, I was thankful he didn't. Masturbating creeper, let's not meet again. Encounter with a gunman at 4 a.m. Hey, my name's Rowan. Just your typical 18-year-old boy enjoying his summer vacation in a quiet suburb of a Washington city. Now, I've lived in this area for 14 years. It's never made me feel unsafe. Nothing ever happens here, to be honest. Sure, occasionally the older people who live here call the cops on rowdy kids. A literal catfight starts or things get stolen, but honestly, nothing much else happens. Nobody knows we exist. Even when I told my friends at school my address, they needed me in a car to direct them. Basically, we're a pretty off-the-charts suburb, and that's why this incident struck me as odd. I was snoozing peacefully this morning, August 25th, and in that sort of limbo between awake and not awake. Now, I am a light sleeper, mainly due to anxiety. As soon as something is off in my surrounding areas, or there's any noise I can hear that's out of the ordinary, I'm up and at 'em. So when I heard a series of loud pops in rapid succession, I was up. I sat in bed for a few minutes, thoroughly confused by the whole situation. I'd never heard anything like the pops before, so I was pretty curious, to be honest, and right now, fully awake. I heard my dad get up, so I grabbed my phone, turned on that handy little flashlight, because if it was gunshots, fucking turning on my lights and alerting a possible danger, and followed him into the kitchen. After peering out the window and seeing a crowd of people, as well as way too many lights for 4 a.m. in the morning, we went outside. It was then a car pulled up the street towards the tip of the cul-de-sac of where we lived. At first, we figured it was just a neighbor out there, but it wasn't. We had never seen the black sedan before, and under the light of my flashlight, we could see the driver was holding something. Now, my dad always had a pistol in the house, and I immediately recognized the shape of the item. Luckily, he seemed more intent on getting away. The man sped down the streets and wound up crashing into a power box, uprooting it, destroying a fence, and wrecking a car in the process, also completely knocking out the power for the entire street. The guy got out and fled almost right away without firing any more rounds, and another participant with a gun who had been shot was taken to the hospital. We learned later from the neighbors that the woman they had been visiting that morning was a prostitute. Other than that, we don't know what caused the blow up. Hell, we didn't even know we had a prostitute on the street until then. Sadly, my power just got turned back on. I was hoping to submit this sooner. I don't know if they got the guy ever. I don't know. So, gunmen who passed by me and my dad, let's not meet again, okay? Thanks. Whoops, wrong house. Using a throwaway for reasons that will be obvious. This happened a few nights ago, on New Year's Eve 2014. A group of about 10 of my friends and I went out to bars to celebrate. The details are fuzzy. By the end of the night, the big group of us ended up split into smaller groups. Eventually, I was left alone with just my friend Alex. Bar time rolled around and Alex and I left the bar we were at and began walking to our friend Jamie's house. Jamie had told all of us that we could stay over at her house that night because she lived a close 20-minute walk from the bars. Jamie left the bars early because she wasn't feeling well, but told us we could still crash at her place. Anyways, Alex and I finally made it to Jamie's house after a long time of wandering. We were unfamiliar with the neighborhood, especially in the dark, and especially when we were drunk like that. And I called her a couple times so she could let us in. No answer. Her doorbell is broken, so we didn't even try it. It was almost 3 a.m., so we figured that she had fallen asleep. Now, Jamie's door had this feature where if you stick any sort of house key about halfway into the lock and twist the key hard, the door itself was open. Alex stuck his own house key into the lock, and doorknob turned, and we stepped inside. We immediately sobered up when we realized that we were not. In fact, in Jamie's house. We were in a goddamn drug house. The room off of the entrance in the foyer area was completely lined with tables of marijuana plants. In the middle of the room was a table that had several firearms on it. The windows were covered with heavy blackout curtains, but the room had an ambient glow due to the plant lights. I don't know what the actual term for these lights are, but they were kind of like lamp-like and were positioned over the plants. Alex and I were standing in this room, completely frozen, and just staring with our jaws on the floor. The only thing that broke us from our trance at all was hearing multiple sets of footsteps walking around upstairs. We immediately turned and bolted out the front door and sprinted a few blocks until we got to a well-lit bus stop. I decided that I didn't care about finding Jamie's house anymore and was more than willing to pay cab fare to get me back to my own apartment. So I called a cab, and Alex and I got back to my apartment at around 4 a.m. When Alex and I woke up in the morning, well, it was actually early afternoon. We confirmed that, yes, this actually happened, and it wasn't some drunken fantasy or something like that. My immediate reaction was that we needed to call the police, but then I remembered that the only reason we found the house was because we technically had broken into it. There was also the minor fact that we were completely hammered, and neither of us really remembered which house it was. We got in my car and I cruised around Jamie's neighborhood. However, neither of us were able to pick out which house it was. It is a college neighborhood, so most of the houses look very similar. I asked Jamie if she had heard rumors about a grow house in her neighborhood, and she had no idea what I was talking about, even after we told her the whole entire story. I honestly feeling really guilty about this, because even though it is a college neighborhood, there are a lot of families with little kids who live in that neighborhood. Also, I feel a little bad about breaking into a stranger's house, but I mostly just feel lucky that none of the residences of that house noticed mine and Alex's brief and accidental presence. I want to leave a tip with the police department, but like I said, I don't remember which house it is. I also don't particularly want to be arrested for breaking and entering. Any advice would be cool.